the argument that immigrants themselves are no different from the ones that came 100 years ago, I think, is quite wrong. And I think that the major difference here is ethnicity, or race, if you will. I think that race is important for two main reasons. One is that human beings as a species are a naturally tribal group of people. We have inside, outside groups. We have families, for one example, where family comes first in virtually every society. And we tend to be very attuned to even small, trivial differences between groups. I don't mean to suggest I think this is a good thing. I wish we could be more universalist, but the reality is that we are not going to be that way, and we shouldn't be basing policy on that either. Now, the second reason I think race is important is that there are real differences between groups, not just trivial ones that we happen to notice more than we should. Races differ in all sorts of ways, and probably the most important way is in IQ. Decades of psychometric testing has indicated that, and at least in America, you have Jews with the highest average IQ, usually followed by East Asians, and then you have non-Jewish whites, Hispanics, and then blacks. These are real differences. They're not going to go away tomorrow, and for that reason, we have to address them in our immigration discussions and our debates. And you can see that when you combine these two things, group differences in ability combined with a natural tribal disposition is going to create usually parallel cultures within a multiracial society rather than an assimilated culture. And I think that is a major, major obstacle to the assimilation of today's immigrants because they are not from Europe, which is, I think, a major difference which Mark sort of tries to avoid discussing. Now, I know what the common response is here, and Mark mentions it in his book a little bit, which is to say something like, well, the Irish used to be considered non-white, and now they're white today. And the Sicilians the same way. Can you imagine the Sicilians? Well, they're white today. This is based on a syllogism that is fairly obviously false, right? The syllogism, if you sort of work it out logically, goes like this. It says, some people in the past who were unassimilable, who were thought to be unassimilable, actually ended up being assimilated. Therefore, everyone who we think is unassimilable will actually be assimilated later on. Obviously, you can see the fallacy here where you can't generalize this claim without evidence. And I think that there are a number of counterexamples here already in America. We have blacks, we have American Indians, and even early Mexican Americans who have been living in the country for a long time and have not assimilated to the cultural mainstream as typified by white Americans. Obviously, I think with blacks we know that, at least in my opinion, I think black and white cultures actually, if anything, diverged in the last 50 years rather than converged. American Indians have been here a long time, and we still have Indian reservations. And Mexican Americans, and we tend to think of them as being here only recently, and I believe it's something like 3/4 of them have been either first or second generation immigrants today. But they've been around since the Mexican-American War. Several thousand families were already living in the areas that the United States acquired during that war. And they've been here ever since, and I don't think that they have been defined as white, certainly not by Europeans, and really not by themselves either, except in the cases where they're trying to distinguish themselves from being black. In fact, it's interesting that as part of the deal with Mexico, the Mexican Americans were given legal definition as white by the United States government because they needed to conform to the Naturalization Act, which had reserved it to white people. But even that legal definition has not changed their status. I don't know if Mark is going to get a chance to respond directly to what I'm saying, but if he does, I think it would be a good place to start by answering a question I'm about to pose in the form of a thought experiment, which is just to imagine if early immigrants in the 20th century, say, the Italians, the Poles, the Jews, the Irish, imagine if we replaced all of them with, say, Australian Aborigines, Pakistanis, and Cambodians. Imagine if they were the immigrants in the early part of the 20th century. Can we really say, with any kind of rational argument, that they today would be considered absolutely indistinguishable from the white majority, that there would be no cultural differences between them? I think it's very difficult to make that argument, so I think that would be a good place to start. I see your sort of a triangulation attempt, right? Because in the book, when you say immigrants are no different from anyone else, it's helpful because you can say, well, at least I'm not like Richwine and people like me. That was my yeah. But nevertheless, I think it would be a lot healthier to discuss this issue, the racial issue here, because, look, I mean, it's here and it's not going away, and we can't wish it away. I do not believe that race is insurmountable, certainly not, but it is definitely a larger barrier today than it was for immigrants in the past, simply because they are not from Europe. Thanks.